Okay, so we had a comment from somebody calling themselves, we never know who we're dealing with when we're online, right? Devon9580, with respect to this most recent Charlie Kirk and Jimmy Kimmel presentation, Essay to London presentation. Your idea that it doesn't make sense that he wasn't MAGA is absolutely myopic and hinges on the idea that children always follow in their parents' footsteps ideologically. Not particularly keen on arguing the thesis, but I'm just presenting all the possibilities, as it were, so that from the whole, if you like, plateau, which spills out through the clouds like a spilled ghee or butter, which is like the blood of the warriors, as they send out their drones and do whatever they're doing. We have a situation where we could use Ionescu, Eugenie Ionescu, his rhinoceros, to pose some questions. This is vulgarly presented as some kind of meditation on World War II, but that's not the point of Ionescu says this is absolutely not the point of what he's getting at. He's getting at more or less the same thing that he gets at with the plays that could be easily, readily depicted as about World War II. It's the same thing he's getting at in his more surreal plays like The Killer, and in his other play about the corpse that keeps getting larger, and in all his most dissonant. So we could look at this from a number of ways, but we could make a hymn to accelerationism. That's one way. So I would try the hymn to acceleration this way. So first of all, we're just analyzing everything that could be plausible. We're not like Cicero or Johnny Cochran saying, trying to do a Trump and just say, if the glove fits, you must acquit, and then get a guilty man off because you're a quick talker with the hoi polloi. No, but we're trying to be scientific. We're trying to be scientific. So we want to rule out everything that's vaguely plausible. So along with the other provocations, we got this request for what's the real evidence here about the online culture business. So I did find an authority, as it were. His name is Ryan Broderick, and we should remember this name. Broder comes from Brody, and it means a forging place in the stream or in the river. It means a shallow crossing, a place where it's possible to cross. You shouldn't conflate that, as some persons are, rather willfully, I must say, necessarily with this word Bruder, the German word Bruder spelled with a U, which is not the same word. Freud's ancestors came from Brody, Ukraine, and some people that came from there. Freud changed his name totally to Freud. Or maybe it was because his mother married into the Freud family. That's probably more plausible. I'm not actually sure. But some people just decided to Germanize their names Brody to Broder, which is why there's many Jews with the name Broder, I think. Everybody in that town, by the way, was exterminated that was Jewish during the war in Brody. But historically, it was a Galatian center of Judaism, and Agamben has even written something interesting on sort of a totally different, almost Ionescu, like Kafkaian view. Let's say Kafkaian, that's the best, because what Agamben's plucked out about Ukraine in the time of in like the late 19th century, and what was really happening there. The border changed from Ukraine to Poland with respect to Brody also, but that didn't really matter because it was really understood as being in either. It was understood as a Galatian town. Galatia, there's like 3 different regions called Galatia, but that Eastern European Galatian region. But this is sort of like Kafka's revelation that there's no law, which is basically we could superimpose on Kant's attempt to say das Sollen or the ought exists, and when there's a stats or a sentence, so it's like it's funny how the different languages show kind of different perspective. Their languages think. Yet the usual word sentence in English doesn't necessarily at all remind a native speaker of the legal sentence, passing sentence. But I think Stats, German word for sentence, somehow it has maybe just because it sounds more stern somehow. Stats, Grund, and all these concepts remind one somehow more of that language has to do with law, and that there's no law without parsing language. There's no law without classical scholarship. So I think one could say here, this Broderick has raised a question whether, this guy's 22 years old, and the things that he knows about and he takes for granted among his peers are quite different than the things one might assume. And so then this guy who has, I put on my X feed the thing he has something called Garbage Day Newsletter. But he suggests that this could be a connection to accelerationism, so there's accelerationism, the word and the name, just like there's factories or factory, the word and the name and the concept that we're all familiar with. But acceleration is, as a concept, is already familiar to Leo Strauss and already understood by Leo Strauss, and has this broad meaning of more or less like almost the reverse of Ludditism, almost the reverse. But it means sort of like you see that there could be some problems with AI, which is already theorized, I think maybe by Harold Laswell and some other guys who were big names at the time and had a far reach at the time, and they wrote in articles in the New York Times and stuff like that. That okay, it could be that this super brainwashing techniques and what didn't yet have the name AI would be dangerous. And then Leo Strauss says, well, why not just stop? And that's sort of that would be like kind of hard anti-accelerationism. But accelerationism is like, why not go further in it? But besides from that, the general essence of accelerationism, which I think we could say is a modification of the technological essence, which is to say the abandonment of science as explanation or clarification, and only science as mechanism or mechanical doing something. That's sort of the technological essence, and then we explain it in a way through this notion of accelerationism. We could either be for accelerationism. Ostensibly, we could either be for it or against it. but maybe we can't. So that's part of the analysis. But then this other part he's bringing out doesn't have to do with the accelerationist concept, but rather with the fact that there's these political groups like the 764 accelerationist terrorist group, which are basically like they operate. They do a lot of things that where they get money from people from some kind of Black Mirror type of activity, something where they're forcing people to pay blackmail or something like that. And then when people, and they use kind of mafia techniques where they have it set up where they can report plausibly that there's an active shooter inside somebody's house, and then the police come in and raid, and sometimes when they're raiding they kill the person, and they got really proficient with this type of technique. I mean, that's one scenario they've often used, but they have other ones and they're innovating. So taken in that light, there is some, again, I'm not trying to press the thesis really, but I'm just saying there is some plausible evidence in that direction, and in my view it makes much more sense than the conspiratorial views on the Kirk assassination, which keep trying to question like what these guys were doing standing right next to him, or whether he had an earpiece in and was listening to an earpiece, whether there was some kind of augmented reality goggles on Robinson when he did the shooting, and all kinds of things like that. I find those much less plausibly interesting, although I would say we could spare some people to look into that. That's fine. It's not totally silly. But let's see, what else do we have here? So yeah, the writer was bringing out that Robinson's part of the culture and ideology of Mormonism. So that's very interesting. So there's another question that I wanted to kind of touch on is the question of what does it mean to be red-pilled, or however you want to express it, to be radicalized. Is this simply something superficial? So say we were talking about people who were raised in British Guyana, which became Guyana in 1966, and then had a son who was, even though they raised him in Harlem, what did he receive in the family, and how did that form him, and why was he not an African American in the normal sense? What is it that comes prior to a classroom in the family that's totally formative? And that's sort of what I'm aiming at. I'm not aiming at, so in other words, I exclude as a starting point, it could play a factor, but I exclude as a starting point the Charles Murray type of Darwinian biological analysis. Instead, I say the first thing we see is this emergence of the being out of the family, and maybe they're already talking about somebody that's already, 5 or 6 years old or something, even though, of course, personality shows much earlier than that, but it's not clear that individuality or sort of transcendental consciousness appears in the beings before a fairly in young children, before a fairly far age, even though all kinds of tendencies, their personality, things that they'll probably have all their lives are already evident. It's not always clear that the real transcendental consciousness of that person is there until sometimes a later date. But so that's already pretty late. We could probably start with preschool, right? But so 4-year-old and so on. But in any case, what does one get from the family already before a classroom? And then, yeah, this Mormon thing, it's like, is it just about a conversion through some kind of teaching, or through something, the way one talks about being radicalized or being black-pilled on the internet? So I give one example of that is the guy Godfrey Cambridge, who had the upbringing I was just bringing out from the parents from British Guiana and born in Harlem, but went to school in Canada, in Nova Scotia, I think. And now if you just look this guy up and look up any video with him, you'll see immediately he's not an African American. It's just very obvious. So that's what I'm kind of getting at. It's like, yeah, he's a black guy with like dark black skin, but just his person, he's not like he's just not an African American. He's a British guy, basically. That's how it comes off. He's like a British guy. And then one can ask, whatever happens with this guy in terms of changes, he watches Gregory come out with the in 1964 with the work with the word nigger on it, and then all this kind of political thing. And then I think of that partially because the guy Cecil Brown, that hangs around Strata sometimes, he came out a couple years later also with the novel with the word nigger in the title, which was then sort of like, I think what it means is like, oh, we're claiming this word, and then at length we're going to exclude anyone that tries to use it from using it. And then we have our own thing, and then in a certain way it's like what was before something used to degrade becomes the sign of the stupidity and shame of the, I guess, like what the stupid thing Zizek likes to harp on, the notion of Native American is a sign that the oppressors got it wrong, because they thought they were going to India, and then they had to change the name. So this Zizek notion of turning the thing around in order to gain a sort of sense of pride, and then to mock the other as being, in a way, this is like, in the refined way, I think, like Paul Celan, his poetry sort of says, oh, look, we Eastern European Jewry are totally superior to these fascists, even though the Nazis are in some way sophisticated. But basically, most of the Nazis are vulgar people. And this is the attitude of sort of like, we can not be angry with these people, but just look, we just see them, and we kind of say, I don't even want to touch that with the 12-foot pole. That's all right. It's inferior. It's decided. And so in a certain way, yeah, you get that also with these political movements that were going on, in which people tried to draw Godfrey Cambridge into. But then just look at him. Just look at 5 seconds. You look, you see he's not an African American. So they keep trying to, he looks like an African American. They call him, what's his word? It's not, they called him something to do with the hair, with the black people's hair. They use a word that's derogatory towards him, and it made him angry. And in this sense, that they were able to sort of provoke him directly, and it's like, tried to make him angry. In that sense, he was compelled to in some way participate with African American culture, even though he basically wasn't an African American. He was just drawn in because of his appearance and experiences. But so this is the type of thing I'm trying to say. If the guy's basically Mormon, then Well, let's look at this. Let me mention what Dugin's saying. So we should understand Dugin properly. When it happened, when the Kirk was killed, Dugin says immediately that's Soros. But what does he mean? He means that Soros controls um, um, all kinds of sort of media outlets and things, and academic think tanks, and the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and the how's it called, Human Rights Watch, and all those things. And therefore, he has a media power. And now, of course, he founded that university under Michael Ignatieff, which somewhat pithily, we could say, Michael Ignatieff himself said this is the essence of the university is that it's an anti-majoritarian institution. And so then Yanukovych was quick to get rid of that. And so you could see some of the issues at play there, and Dugin saying, yeah, look at this power of this propaganda box of Soros. But what I want to say is the hymn to accelerationism could be read this way. We're getting to the position where because this kind of how do they call it in music when the Stockhausen and all the music which is kind of discordant, or I can't think of the right word, but sort of not harmonic, not melodious, but achromatic or something like that. I don't know. It's a commonplace thing in any case in the development of modern music. But if this happens also to the fragmentation of the consciousness of young people, so remember this guy's 22 years old, yeah, that's a new factor in which seems to say accelerationism has already broken in, sort of, and it's already picturing things to us in a Inescoian or discordant way, and maybe it's irreversible. So we had the same thing so the Russians, so you could say Dugin protests too much because he does the same thing, and so like the Russians were accused of using TikTok to alter the election in I think in Romania, in Latvia maybe. I can't remember if it was Latvia or Romania, but both had contested elections along the lines of the vote went one way, but then there was accusation of Russian TikTok interference that had swung it, and then it was like all the people that were sort of on the side of Soros in those countries were associated with the urban centers, of course, because that's where he sets up his think tanks and stuff, and that's where the universities are. But then it was like there was a claim that actually the guy who won was big with the most of the country at large, and yeah, then there was a bunch of disputes about who's actually the lawfully elected president. But so in this sense, you could see for Dugin, yeah, that the Soros influence seems more menacing and close. But you could kind of see how social media influencing on. See, we don't think about it because once you get past a certain age, once you get like out of your 30s, then you're you're too far away from your own formation, I think. But yeah, for somebody who's 22, you're just getting indoctrinated because there's some ideas you're like, wow, that's kind of interesting. You get into them. In a certain way, this is like the Phaedrus where Socrates is talking about being lovesick for speeches. And certainly, yeah, in that, or yeah, I always quote this, but in the Name of the Rose, when the Kristen Slater character asked the Sean Connery character, "Did you ever fall in love?" And then he says, "Oh yes, Veros, Aristotle, etc." And so there's a situation where when people are 22, then they're very open to sudden convictions, sudden imbecile convictions. Like the most blatant case of an imbecile conviction I can think of, although it might be mitigating factors, is like a guy tells me about chemtrails, and then he says, "You see, what I'm scared of is that you guys don't see the evidence." Because the idea is the evidence, there's planes going by, there's exhaust coming out of them, and then somehow conspiracy theorists think they have an experience of the evidence. It doesn't occur to them that they're putting an interpretation on it. Once you take it up scientifically, then it's like, yeah, it's true. It could be wrong that it's just exhaust. It's true. It could be a CIA plot to derange us. But then we kind of look, and it's like, is there enough evidence to really say that? So I'd say the same thing kind of goes with this cottage industry of looking for conspiracies everywhere. So maybe, like I say, we could spare some people to look at that. It's not totally silly, but on the Kirk stage, I don't think there's really any evidence anything happened other than that Robinson shot him, and it was a 30 gauge high caliber 30-06 bullet, and I don't think he aimed right for that how do you call it, the carotid artery, but I think he just happened to hit it. But on the other hand, there wasn't much wind, I don't think, so that's not I don't think that's a very hard shot. I don't know why the conspiracists necessarily feel the need to try to act like it's some miracle shot or something. Not really, I don't think so. And I think, and even we should bring out that the sights on those rifles, like a cheap sight you can get, is better than the best military rifle sights were 10 years ago. And not just a little bit better, but way better. So, I don't know. They could fool around with the conspiracy theories on that and maybe discover something, but I don't find it that interesting, and even more so. But then here's the thing, then people are going to say, but it's my experience because I saw the first time I saw the video, I saw that his earpiece came out, and I could tell that what had happened was that there was a little sound. He had heard a little sound. He had frozen looking for where the sound came from, like when a hunter blows a whistle to get the deer to kind of freeze and look and then shoots them. And that's exactly how it happened, and I experienced it that way. So experience is useless. It's always, it's just like some little isolated thing out of nowhere, and then we have to tag on. The point is we have to make sure that it actually makes sense. Does that make sense? Only if you, only if it's like the only thing you're thinking. Sort of. It's like only if you're totally absorbed in the solitude of that idea, and then you say, oh yeah, that is exactly like a deer, like hunters do with a deer. That's true, but I don't think that he even had an earpiece in. And also, in addition, this would mean that we'd have to complicate the theory and say that Robinson was Robinson in contact also with the guy that was sending the signal to Kirk, and how does that all work? And then there's a lot of logistics, and it's like this is becoming a very complicated theory over this supposed experience of seeing the deer thing. People can get caught and stuff like that if they go with experience instead of with cool inspection. I think with cool inspection you have to kind of say, yeah, what's more reasonable here, and then at the same time you have to be ready to say when there's actual cogent evidence that the thing that's probably the most reasonable isn't true. You have to be totally ready to accept, to hear that and to follow and to look into it. That's a scientific attitude, I think. But the question I guess I have here is this accelerationism? So I think so we're quick to say, yeah, here's this Mormon who heard the Soros call, or who heard the standard Democrat call, which is sort of like presents itself as authoritative, and that's sort of why I think that was one of Charlie Kirk's main things. Is like, oh, they're presenting themselves as the authority, and we're here to tear that down. Just like the Democrats in the 60s and 70s would have been, not the 60s so much, I guess in the 70s, after the Democrats after the Civil Rights Act came in would have been more like, oh, we're critical of the establishment, and then there's the Nixon thing, and so that it accelerated, as it were. But I think that with the Kirk situation, yeah, that's interesting that we've had this back and forth, but then we have this totally happening within this hyper propaganda situation where Trump has become also weaponizing this cyclonic vision that puts everything into just seeing experience and not coolly looking at everything that's available for the scientific inspection. And I think, though, the problem here isn't just to be pointed at in one direction. So I thought that's interesting. There's kind of a mutual contamination. Let me kind of try to wrap it up more with this, is that, so one, I don't think analysis on that lines is going to get there, because there could be accelerationism at work at the most scientific appraisal of the situation, because the agential AI is coming in. It's going to be super good at brainwashing people, especially young people, because of what I just said. I mean, because it's not exactly brainwashing, it's just you fall in love with the first idea that's really, you're disposed towards somebody like Ron Paul. Maybe when you're young, Ron Paul struck you as very impressive, his whole narrative. If you're disposed towards classical scholarship or something like that, the Iliad and the Odyssey under certain translations could strike you as amazing worlds of thought. I mean, there's this question, Neil Strauss, this beautiful question, does Homer think? Is Homer sort of already philosophy prior to in the Archaic period? So I think here, yeah, there's a possibility at the root of accelerationism is happening, and that it doesn't, the political situation in the sense of, is Trump in power, is Vance in power, isn't totally at all as fundamental as the question, is the new agential AI going to super brainwash generations such that the Western brainwashing of the Ukrainians between 1991 and 2020 through the school change in the school system, so that whole generation grew up with the Western attitude that teachers are of low importance and businessmen are of high importance. That came in, and it degraded the respect for stats, sentence, law, reason, and then you have the current situation of the steel porcupine of Ursula von der Leyen. But in this case, it's not, the change wouldn't happen necessarily only through it wouldn't happen primarily through a change in education. It would happen primarily through a change in the technological situation, which allows the internet to become a different object. And so then the accelerationism is as though all but out of human hands.